Hey everyone, and welcome to the 5th round of the Grand Swiss in Riga, Latvia. Now that you've seen me in the wild, let's jump straight into the game. So there will be no arrows today just because I have my laptop situated on my bed and I don't have a mouse to move around and make some arrows, but I'll try to explain every single move as I go, what my thoughts were behind the moves, just so that you can follow my thought process as we go. Today I played against a Spanish player, Maria Floris, and out of the opening I felt incredibly confident. I had more time on the clock, and I feel like my position was rather superior, exciting, and had a lot of potential. Although I could not find that breakthrough, and at some point it reached a critical moment and I decided to go all out. I know Tal would have been very, very impressed with my choice, but I think I could have at least slowed down and evaluated the position from a positional point of view rather than a tactical one. So as usual, I go for e4, and history shows my opponent has played the French in the past, which I was excited to face once again, as we did against another opponent. I think we've had 2 Frenches so far in my database from this tournament, one with white and one with black. But today, my opponent played c5, and this is the Sicilian, and knight f3, e6. And we saw something very similar against Vishali in the first round, and I also have a very interesting game tracking back to 2017 from the African Championship, where I believe I played against Sabrina Latreille. I might be wrong on this, but it was an Algerian opponent. And the game continued where I played d4 and went for a sort of Maroczy bind setup with c4, trying to keep my center completely solid, even though with the Maroczy bind, if you are looking it up or looking into playing it, it is very solid for white. But moving forward, if black tries to push, it's usually white who has the advantage. If white tries to push in the middle game, then it's usually black who can find a way to either equalize or gain an advantage. So I didn't go for this. I decided to play knight c3, which I also played in the first round, and knight to c6, and now it has transposed to exactly what we had against Vishali in the first round. I played d4, and this was the naturally occurring position, and in the first game, my opponent played knight to f6, where I took the knight on c6, and after b takes c6, I played e5, and I believe that position is completely equal. Knight takes d5 after knight d5, and at least I know a little bit better on how to face that continuation, because I believe the mistake I made in the first round was not developing my pieces and losing tempi due to the point where I think I moved my bishop twice from d3 to b5. If you guys remember the analysis of the first video, if you haven't checked it out, it is on the same channel that you're watching this video. And here my opponent didn't have to put me under so much strain. Again, like the first game, no PTSD since my opponent played a6. After the game, something very interesting happened. A player named Ivan Fernandez from Chile approached me wanting to analyze my game, and I quite liked the gesture since there were quite a few people still at the venue analyzing their games, so it felt like a very tight-knit community, and I had some people watch the analysis too. I believe Ivan played exactly the same opening but with the black pieces, and he provided quite a lot of insight in this opening, and even provided me with an alternative of what I could do in a position like this, and it's definitely ideas I will incorporate in the future. F4, exactly what I said, and queen to c7. So the reason why I played f4 is because I really wanted to gain that space in the center and on the king side eventually. Queen c7 was not expected, although it is probably part of the theory in this opening, e6, a6, queen c7. But here I was half expecting bishop c5, putting pressure on that diagonal, and going for a future queen b6, although it should not be too much of a concern. I asked Ivan this question as well, and he probably just put my mind at ease. It's not a huge threat. After bishop to c5, I think I can just continue with, I believe, bishop to e3 or something along those lines. But here I just brought the knight back as to neutralize my concerns and not have to worry about it in the future. So knight f3, just to cozy up my knight back and control the two central squares d4 and e5. And here I find that my f4 pawn is under no danger, even though the queen is pointing at it. The bishop on c1 does a good enough job protecting it. d6, another move I did not expect. I expected a little bit more proactiveness from my opponent. I think this is what led to my immense comfortability in this position, because I felt like there was a lot more I was afraid of, that none of those fears came true. And here black just developed normally, which allowed me to take the space in the center that I wanted initially. Bishop to d3, I usually put my bishop on d3 to aim towards the king side, in case black does decide to short castle the h7 pawn. Does become a weakness later on, and something I can focus on and target. Knight to f6 and h3. The reason I decided to play h3, and probably wasn't really a necessary move, is because I was afraid of knight to g4 after bishop e3. But something I can actually show you without needing an arrow or my mouse is if bishop e3, knight g4 isn't that much of a threat, because we retreat the bishop to g1. It does look like an ugly square for the bishop, but there is no rush for white to castle or complete the development. Since white has that sort of space in the center, do correct me if I'm wrong. And bishop g1 also sort of shoulders the knight a bit, and it's the concept of two squares. So if your bishop is two squares away from the knight cannot approach or go forward without the bishop at least being in line to attack the knight. So the knight cannot go to e3, f2, or h2, just because my bishop is covering all those squares. And that's something you can use as well in the future. So the point of bishop g1 is to play h3, push the knight away, and then go back to e3, because the question is posed to this knight. What is the knight doing? What's the future of this knight? Is he having a great vacation? What's going on? So we can go back to the current position. Oh, that flips the board. Don't do that. Okay, so we have h3. I thought, okay, there's no need to rush. I have time for this prophylactic move. Those of you who don't know what prophylaxis is, and yes, I'm sort of mansplaining this word. It's a preventative move, and I'm putting a lot of preventative measures in place here to make sure that my position is indestructible. Nonetheless, I'm seeing a lot of ghosts. So h3 stopping the knight, and after b5, a3. These Mickey Mouse moves that I'm making on the side of the board, we have h3 and a3. Okay, a3 has a little bit more purpose, since we're just preventing b4 with the pawn. Bishop to b7. And bishop b7 is a regular move here in the Sicilian, just providing the bishop with a really strong diagonal that will be utilized later on. Bishop to e3, just normal developing. Bishop to e7. And here I had an idea with queen e2. Of course, the queen e2 move does look a little bit odd, but there are many reasons for, developing the queen one square up to d2, e2, and so on. Number one, there's the possibility of long castling or short castling. But here I had a very interesting idea of putting the queen on f2, allowing it to gain access to the king side, and also giving it the range along that diagonal. In case black decides to play knight to a5, I will then have bishop to b6, attacking the queen and the knight. So I thought, why not put my queen on that square? I'm defending the dark squares, even though I do have a potential g4 and g5 with my pawn attacking on the queen side. There are just so many possibilities that I think I would need to spend a lot more time in preparation of this opening and seeing which ideas work best when. So I think this is more of a matter of experience and a matter of just home preparation rather than over the board. There are just so many things that can happen that I think it's important to practice in training positions like this. It's just so exciting. I want to play all the ideas all the time. Okay, so we have rook c8, and I suppose the reason for rook c8 is just controlling the c file, and it's the only open file for black at the moment. So it does make sense. I just continue with queen to f2. It's my general idea of controlling the diagonal. Black has a really good response to my threat of both trying to put my bishop on b6 to annoy the queen. Perhaps it was just a bluff, to be honest. My whole point was to prevent knight a5, which I think is one of black's only potential threats in this position, because in the Sicilian, it is well known that black tries to attack on the queen side and white tries to attack on the king side. And I think this could be a very prophylactic idea by black, since knight d7 both stops any sort of proactivity from my side, playing g4, g5, gaining a tempo on the knight, gaining more space on the king side, and also allowing the black bishop a little bit of range, but also then threatening knight a5 again, renewing the threat of knight a5, knight c4, because now the knight on d7 is covering b6. So my idea here was to simply castle and try to find a central break, since all of black's pieces are a little bit pushed back compared to mine. So I castled, and knight a5 was played, and here I have f5. A lot of the time I try to analyze games without an engine, just so that it prevents me from becoming lazy. So I try to analyze it myself, and then I go later on to see if I've missed any tactics or better moves, consulting the engine. So upon making these videos, like I mentioned, I don't use the engine, so a lot of my self-analysis could be incorrect or inaccurate, so do bear with. And that's why I've opened the comments to literally any suggestion in pretty much any position, so stop me anytime. Well, technically you can't, because this is a pre-recorded video. I need to start humaning better. So castling, and there was just so much I was considering in this position. There is knight to g5, threatening, I suppose, queen h4, the pawn on e6, the pawn on h7. There's just so much, and there's also bishop to g5. I can also just take on e6 and threaten it later on with the knight. So here's a critical position, but I decided to play queen to g3, just putting a small amount of pressure on the g7 pawn, and also potentially attacking d6 later on, because the only two pieces defending d6 at the moment is the queen on c7 and the bishop on e7, and no pawn is defending that square, so it could be, a target later on. And I'm always trying to find ways to add pressure to my opponent slowly, and I speak about being slow in certain positions, but then I make really drastic decisions when I shouldn't. So bishop to f6, quite normal, and once again I wanted to exchange on e6 in the hopes that I could possibly attack e6 with the knight and then play knight e6, trying to fork the rook and the queen. But I don't really see any way for that right now. What I like about bishop f6 as well, it removes a defender from the d6 pawn. So possibly in this position, I could play a simple move like rook to d1, just adding pressure to d6 like normal, and just disregarding completely knight to c4, because at any point I can just take the knight with the bishop. So then we have bishop to g5, and I suppose I just wanted to eliminate this defender. There's no huge threat on my end. That's why I feel like in this position there is a lot more that I could have done. I had fun analyzing the position over the board, but I think at some point it became a little bit frustrating because all I wanted to find were answers, and I was only finding candidate moves and ideas, but no solutions to my potential attack. I couldn't find a breakthrough. Perhaps I could move the queen away from the g file, play g4 and g5, but you can let me know what you think as well. So we have bishop to g5, and here there's just an exchange. After e takes f5, I'd most likely try to get a minor major piece on f5, but maybe I can sacrifice a pawn instead of, spoiler alert, an entire piece later on. I can play something like knight to h4 here, or I could just, I was even considering pushing the pawn to e5, so making a move like this. If knight takes, I have a free bishop. If bishop takes here, I have queen takes. And even if knight takes here, I feel like at some stage I do get something out of this, because there's this, pawn takes and bishop takes f5. There has to be something here. I don't know what there is, but there has to be like a miracle or something in this position. I just feel like it's so spicy. Alright, but we continue. I took back with the pawn, and it was frustrating because my light squared bishop lost all its range, having a pawn stuck on f5, even though it looks really strong. And black has an isolated pawn on d6 that I can target. But I think I was very one-track minded in this position. I was like, how do I attack the king? Show me how to attack the king. But I should have focused on smaller weaknesses instead. And then, obviously, in turn, it would have led to a bigger advantage. Rook to e8. Perhaps I should exchange rooks in this position, because now there are two open files. Well, two semi-open files, and one open file. So I should challenge for this open file, but I decided to put pressure on the d6 pawn instead. Although I don't really have a way forward, because anywhere I move the bishop, it's in danger. Queen b6, moving the king, and d5. And this is the point in the position and in the game where I was like, I am bored. I want something magical to happen, and whether it's dubious, whether Tull would be proud of me, or whether I'm just straight up too ambitious and a little bit silly. But that's the route I decided to take. I was looking at this position with Ivan, and I found that queen h4 could have been better. Just bringing the bishop back to f4 could be good as well. And the whole plan is to simply reposition my pieces and focus my attack on d5, and potentially even take advantage of this knight on a5. If it ever were to move to c4, I think I also have the opportunity to win a pawn. So if I take on c4, let's give an example. So bishop to f4, knight to c4, and bishop takes. And if the pawn took, I believe I have knight takes, d5. So knight to c4 was never really a huge threat here, and nothing I had to worry about. So I believe after bishop to f4, I don't have to really worry about this knight e5 move. I think I can just exchange because it's a free piece, so thank you very much. There's really nothing huge that black is threatening in this position. But brace yourself. Here comes the most astonishing move you have ever seen in the history of today's chess. I played bishop takes b5. Yes. Bishop takes b5 is definitely not a move that should have been played, mainly because none of the ideas that I do have actually work out, and we both had enough time on the clock to figure out the problem with bishop takes b5, and I definitely had enough time on my clock to not play this move. Nonetheless, it did lead to a series of moves, and none of which I ended up. I felt this response was pretty cool because I got the knight back without losing the exchange, but I did lose another pawn, and it left me with 1 pawn compensation for an entire knight, and wasn't enough to save me the game. Well guys, thank you so much for attending today's analysis, and I really hope that I shared a little bit more about my thought process and what were the ideas behind my moves, minus the bishop takes b5 fiasco, blasphemy, whatever you want to call it. Honestly, we look back on days like this and we point and laugh at the Jesse who thought that was a great idea. But thanks again guys, and much love to all of you who do take the time to watch these small little episodes, but thank you. Bye.